NightMerica is an independently produced podcast. If you like what we're doing, please consider supporting patreon.com/NightMerica.
Welcome to NightMerica, a podcast that takes you on a tour of the abnormal, paranormal, weirdly true, and truly weird in every corner across this nation. Because whether it's ghosts, aliens, monsters, or monstrous humans, there's something strange in your neighborhood.
Hi, NightMericans. You are getting just Brit today. Aaron's got a ton on his plate this week, so I'm going to take over for this episode. And I thought we might do something a little bit different. On our Patreon, we have done readings before of kind of classic public domain horror stories. And so I thought I would give you guys a little taste of that here on the main episode. I'm going to be reading a short story by Gertrude Atherton. It's called The Striding Place. It's a story published in 1896. It was first called The Twins. But after kind of rewriting it, reworking it, Gertrude Atherton republished it in 1905, and that's the reading I'll be doing today. It's from her collection of short stories called The Bell in the Fog. Gertrude Atherton lived from 1857 to 1948 to kind of give you some context of time. Some of the language in the reading is going to be a little bit lofty. So just to kind of give you an awareness of when it was written. She lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, but actually the Striding Place is set on the Bolton Stride, which from what I can tell in photos is a really gorgeous brook in Yorkshire. It's a little bit north of Manchester, England, making it pretty much smack in the middle of the island of the United Kingdom. It looks like a stream for the most part with two kind of mossy boulders on either side. And just a few feet kind of up or a little bit up, it looks more like a river. It's a little bit bigger. But it's really deadly, actually. This thin, innocuous area actually has a change in current. That's how it can kind of flow through this slimmer part. And it can trap people. There are kind of caves and rocks that the current has kind of shaved spots out of underneath the water. It's surprisingly deep. So people have gone in and not made it out alive. They end up getting trapped in the little nooks carved in the rocks under the surface. So I hope you enjoy this little bit of story, something change up for the week. And we will be back next week with our regular story. And I hope you guys enjoy this reading. Weigel, continental and detached, tired early of grouse shooting. To stand propped against a sod fence while his host's workmen routed up the birds with long poles and drove them towards the waiting guns made him feel himself a parody on the ancestors who had roamed the moors and forests of this West Riding of Yorkshire in hot pursuit of game worth of the killing. But when in England in August, he always accepted whatever proffered for the season and invited his host to shoot pheasants on his estates in the south. The amusements of life, he argued, should be accepted with the same philosophy as its ills. It had been a bad day. A heavy rain had made the moor so spongy that it fairly sprang beneath the feet. Whether or not the grouse had haunts of their own, wherein they were immune from rheumatism, the bag had been small. The women, too, were an unusually dull lot, with the exception of the new-minded debutante who bothered Weigel at dinner by demanding the verbal restoration of the vague paintings on the vaulted roof above them. But it was none of these things that sat on Weigel's mind, as, when the other men went up to bed, he let himself out of the castle and sauntered down the river. His intimate friend, the companion of his boyhood, the chum of his college days, his fellow traveler in many lands, The man for whom he possessed a stronger affection than for all men had mysteriously disappeared 2 days ago, and his track might have sprung to the upper air, for all trace had been left behind him. He had been a guest on the adjoining estate during the past week, shooting with the fervor of the true sportsman, making love in the intervals to Adeline Caven, and apparently in the best of spirits. As far as was known, there was nothing to lower his mental mercury, for his rent roll was a large one. Miss Caven blushed whenever he looked at her, and, being one of the best shots in England, he was never happier than in August. The suicide theory was preposterous, all agreed, and there was as little reason to believe him murdered. Nevertheless, he had walked out of March Abbey 2 nights ago, without a hat or overcoat, and had not been seen since. The country was being patrolled night and day. 100 keepers and workmen were beating the woods and poking the bogs on the moors, but as yet not so much as a handkerchief had been found. Weigel did not believe for a moment that Wyatt Gifford was dead, and although it was impossible not to be affected by the general uneasiness, he was disposed to be more angry than frightened. At Cambridge, Gifford had been an incorrigible practical joker, and by no means had outgrown the habit. It would be like him to cut across the country in his evening clothes, board a cattle train, and amuse himself touching up the picture of the sensation in West Riding. However, Weigel's affection for his friend was too deep to companion with tranquility in the present state of doubt, and, instead of going to bed early with the other men, he determined to walk until ready for sleep. He went down to the river and followed the path through the woods. There was no moon, but the stars sprinkled their cold light upon the pretty belt of water, flowing placidly past wood and ruin, between green masses and overhanging rocks, or sloping banks tangled with tree and shrub, leaping occasionally over stones with the harsh notes of an angry scold, to recover its equanimity the moment the way was clear again. It was very dark in the depths where Weigel trod. He smiled as he recalled the remark of Gifford's, "An English wood is like a good many other things in life, very promising at a distance, but a hollow mockery when you get within. You see daylight on both sides, and the sun freckles the very bracken. Our woods need the night to make them seem what they ought to be, what they once were before our ancestors' descendants demanded so much more money in these so much more various days." Weigel strolled along, smoking and thinking of his friend. His pranks, many of which had done more credit to his imagination than this, and recalling conversations that lasted the night through. Just before the end of the London season, they had walked the streets one hot night after a party, discussing the various theories of the soul's destiny. That afternoon they had met at the coffin of a college friend, whose mind had been blank for the past 3 years. Some months previously they had called the asylum to see him. His expression had been senile, his face imprinted with the record of debauchery. In death the face was placid, intelligent, without ignoble lineation, the face of the man they had known at college. Weigel and Gifford had had no time to comment there, and the afternoon and evening were full, but coming forth from the house of festivity together, they had reverted almost cherish
at once
the theory,
to the topic.
Gifford had said, that the soul sometimes lingers in the body after death. During madness, of course, it is an impotent prisoner, albeit a conscious one. Fancy its agony and its horror. What more natural than that, when the life spark goes out, the tortured soul should take possession of the vacant skull and triumph once more for a few hours, while old friends look their last. It has had time to repent while compelled to crouch and behold the result of its work, and it had shriveled itself into a state of comparative purity. If I had my way, I should stay inside my bones until the coffin had gone into its niche. that I might obviate my poor old comrade, the tragic impersonality of death. And I should like to see justice done to it, as it were, to see it lowered among its ancestors with the ceremony and solemnity that it's due. I am afraid that if I dissevered myself too quickly, I should yield to curiosity and hasten to investigate the mysteries of space. You believe in the soul as an independent entity, then? That it and the vital principle are not in the same? Absolutely, he responded. The body and the soul are twins, life comrades. Sometimes friends, sometimes enemies, but always loyal in the last instance. Someday, when I am tired of the world, I shall go to India and become a Mahatma, solely for the pleasure of receiving proof during life of its independent relationship. I say, so suppose you were not sealed upon properly and return after one of your astral flights to find your earthly part unfit for habitation. It is an experiment I don't think I should care to try, unless even juggling with soul and flesh had palled. That would not be an uninteresting predicament. I should rather enjoy experimenting with broken machinery. The high, wild roar of water smote upon Weigel's ear and checked his memories. He left the wood and walked out to the slippery stones, which nearly close to the river wharf at this point, and watched the waters boil down the narrow pass with furious, untiring energy. The black quiet of the woods rose high on either side. The stars seemed colder and whiter just above. On either hand, the perspective of the river might have run into rayless cavern. There was no lonelier spot in England, nor one which had the right to claim so many ghosts, if ghosts there were. Weigel was not a coward, but he recalled uncomfortably the tales of those that had been done to death in the stride. Wordsworth boys of Egremont had been disposed of by the practical Whitaker, but countless others, more venturesome than wise, had gone down into the narrow boiling course, never to appear in the still pool a few yards beyond. Below, the great rocks which formed the walls of the stride was believed to be a natural vault, on those whose shelves the dead were drawn. The spot had an ugly fascination. Weigel stood visioning skeletons uncoffined in green, the home of the eyeless things which had devoured all that it covered and filled that rattling symbol of man's mortality. Then fell to wondering if anyone had attempted to leap the stride of late. It was covered with slime. He had never seen it look so treacherous. He shuddered and turned away, impelled despite his manhood to flee the spot. As he did, though, something tossing in the foam below the fall, something as white yet independent of it, caught his eye and arrested his step. Then he saw that it was describing a contrary motion to the rushing water, an upward, backward motion. Weigel stood rigid, breathless. He fancied he heard the crackling of his hair. Was that a hand? It thrust itself higher above the boiling foam, turned sideways, and 4 frantic fingers were distinctly visible against the black rock beyond. Weigel's suspicious terror left him, and a man was there, struggling to free himself from the suction beneath the stride, swept down, doubtless, but for a moment before his arrival, perhaps as he stood with the back to the current. He stepped close to the edge as he dared. The hand doubled as if imprecation, shaking savagely in the face of that force which leaves its creature immutable law, then spread wide again, clutching, expanding, crying for help as audibly as the human voice. Weigel dashed to the nearest tree, dragged and twisted off a branch with his strong arms, and returned swiftly to the stride. The hand was in the same place, still gesticulating as wildly. The body was undoubtedly caught in the rocks below, perhaps already halfway along one of those hideous shelves. Weigel let himself down upon a lower rock, braced his shoulder against the mass beside him, then, leaning out over the water, thrust the branch into the hand. The fingers clutched it convulsively. Weigel tugged powerfully. His own feet dragged perilously near the edge. For a moment, he produced no impression. Then, an arm shot above the waters. The blood sprang to Weigel's head. He was choked with the impression that the stride had him in her roaring hold, and he saw nothing. Then the mist cleared. The hand and the arm were nearer, although the rest of the body was still concealed by the foam. Weigel peered out with distended eyes. The meager light revealed in the cufflinks of a peculiar device. The fingers clutching the branch were as familiar. Weigel forgot the slippery stones, the terrible death if he stepped too far. He pulled with passionate will and muscle. Memories flung themselves onto the hot light of his brain, troping out rapidly upon each other's heels, as in the thought of the drowning. Most of the pleasures of his life, good and bad, were identified in some way with this friend. Scenes of college days, of travel, where they had deliberately sought adventure and stood between one another and death upon more occasions than one, of hours of delightful companionship among the treasures of art and others in the pursuit of pleasure, flashed like changing particles of a kaleidoscope. Weigel had loved several women, but he would have flouted in these moments the thought that he ever loved any woman as he loved Wyatt Gifford. There were so many charming women in the world, and in the 32 years of his life he had never known another man to whom he had cared to give his intimate friendship. He threw himself on his face. His wrists were cracking. The skin was torn from his hands, and the fingers gripped the stick. There was life in them yet. Suddenly something gave way. The hand swung about, tearing the branch from Weigel's grasp. The body had been liberated and flung outward. Though still submerged by the foam and spray, Weigel scrambled to his feet and sprang along the rocks, knowing that if the danger from the suction was over and that Gifford must be carried straight to the quiet pool. Gifford was a fish in the water and could live under it longer than most men. If he survived this, he would not be the first time that his pluck and science had saved him from drowning. Weigel reached the pool. A man in his evening clothes floated on it, his face turned towards the projecting rock over which his arm had fallen, upholding the body. The white hand that had held the branch hung limply over the rock, its white reflection visible in the black water. Weigel plunged into the shallow pool, lifted Gifford in his arms, and returned to the bank. He laid the body down and threw his coat off that he might be freer to practice the methods of resuscitation. He was glad of the moment's respite. The valiant life in the man might have been exhausted in that last struggle. He'd not dared to look at his face, to put his ear to the heart. The hesitation lasted but a moment. There was no time to lose. He turned to his prostrate friend. As he did so, something strange and disagreeable smote his senses. For half a moment, he did not appreciate its nature. Then, his teeth clacked together. His feet, his outstretched arms pointed towards the wood. But he sprang to the side of the man and bent down and peered into his face. There was no face. I hope you guys enjoyed this classic spooky tale from the public domain collection of Gertrude Atherton. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to check out our Patreon episodes. We have a reading I did of The Pale Man, as well as a whole backlog of a lot of other great stories and funny moments Aaron and I have recorded. We will be back next week with another classic episode. Until then, I hope you have a lovely week. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening. Please consider giving us a review on Apple Podcasts, following us on social media, and sharing the show with your friends. And if you're able, we appreciate your support on patreon.com/NightMerica so we can keep bringing you more spooky stories.
And if you'd like to share your own paranormal stories or seek paranormal advice for entertainment purposes only, email us at nightmericashow@gmail.com.
To you by Manscaped. And to talk about the men's grooming kits, we have one of its fiercest fans, Mr. Lawrence Talbot, an actual werewolf from London.
Right, love. Cheers for having me on, although I prefer lycanthrope. The whole WW word is a bit unseemly. Although, I should also note I have been an American citizen for a while now. So that would explain that almost indistinguishable British accent. Anyhow, Larry, I'm surprised you're in wolf form even though there's not a full moon out. Yes, right. Well, I used to view my condition as a bit of a curse, what with all the hair everywhere. But with the Manscaped Lawnmower 3.0 and its durable skin-safe ceramic blade, which has small teeth, unlike myself, I can be quite the dapper wolf, with my crown jewels, if you will, remaining secure. Now I actually prefer to stay in wolf form permanently.
Pardon me for saying so, but you have a lot of hair. It must take you forever to groom.
Most certainly. It takes quite a bit of time. Thankfully, the Lawnmower 3.0 holds a 90-minute charge, so I've all the time in the world. And with the built-in LED light, I can even see on a moonless night as I trim my naughty bits, my undercarriage, my John Thomas. Right, we get it. Wolfman's got nards.
And with Manscaped Lawnmower 3.0's waterproof technology, you can even clean up in the moors on a rainy English or American night.
It's perfectly splendid, isn't it? And speaking of moors, I still do enjoy taking a bite out of the occasional backpacker. But with the Crop Preserver Ball Deodorant and Crop Reviver Ball Spray Toner, any passers-by that comes close will only smell the aroma of the freshest dangly bits. But don't take our word for it, or even that of a gentleman lycanthrope.
Because with the code NightMerica, you can get 20% off a Manscaped order and receive free shipping. Head to manscaped.com and enter code NightMerica, and you can check out their anti-chafing boxer briefs, Weed Whacker nose hair trimmer, and crop cleanser hair and body wash, all from
Wolf Manscaped. No, only from Manscaped. Manscaped, the right tools for the job.